I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president in 2024. Why am I running for president? Because I want to bring an end to the killing machine that the federal government has become under both Democrats and Republicans. We don't know exactly how many people this killing machine has killed in the last 60 or 70 years, but it certainly has to number in the millions. And that's nothing to scoff at. When it comes to this area of killing, there is no doubt that Democrats and Republicans have made America number one. Let's look at some examples. Let's begin with immigration. Every year, there are immigrants who die of asphyxiation in the back of 18-wheelers, tractor trailers, or they die of drowning trying to cross the Rio Grande, such as 25-year-old Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez, whose body was found on the American side of the Rio Grande, along with the body of his little tiny toddler daughter. And then you got people dying of thirst crossing lonely deserts in Arizona and New Mexico. Or you've got immigrants that die because they've had a bullet fired into their abdomen by some Border Patrol agent. I grew up on the Texas-Mexican border. I spent almost half my life there, and I've seen these deaths ever since I was a kid. In fact, all my life, I've seen this immigration crisis. It's ongoing, it's never ending, it's perpetual. And there's a very simple reason for this. This is a socialist immigration system. It's socialist because it's based on the core socialist principle of central planning. You can ask anybody in Venezuela, Cuba, and North Korea what happens with central planning, and they will tell you it comes with crises and chaos. And that's what we've had on this border for decades. Crises and chaos as a direct result of this system. They will also tell you that socialism oftentimes comes with death, as this system has produced. But it comes with more than that. It comes with an immigration police state also, which is what people in the American Southwest have lived under for decades. You've got fixed highway checkpoints where immigration officials stop vehicles and search them, demand to see people's papers, and people had never even entered Mexico. This is inside the United States. You've also got roving Border Patrol checkpoints where the Border Patrol just drives around and stops whoever they want and searches their vehicle. When I was in high school, I was the victim of one of these roving Border Patrol checkpoints. You've got warrantless trespasses and searches of ranches and farms along the border. No search warrant at all. They just go on in. You've got immigration officials boarding Greyhound buses without a warrant, demanding to see people's papers, just like they do in communist countries. And then you've got that ubiquitous Berlin Wall that former President Trump constructed along the border after stealing land from landowners down there through the abuse of eminent domain powers. And it's a wall that President Biden has continued. It's a disgrace. There's only one solution to this ongoing immigration crisis, chaos, death, and police state. And it's not this term that the mainstream media uses called comprehensive immigration reform. It's a ludicrous term. This is not a broken system, as they sometimes suggest. This is an inherently defective system. Socialism is an inherently defective system. It cannot be made to work. There's only one solution, and that's economic liberty. That is free trade and open immigration. The free movements of goods, services, and people across borders. This is our heritage. America lived under a system of open immigration for more than 100 years. It was one of the most wonderful economic systems ever developed in the history of mankind, and it worked. We need to restore that heritage. Open borders, genuine open borders, the abolition of the Border Patrol and immigration systems and so forth, just people crossing back and forth like human beings. It's the only way to bring an end to this perpetual chaos on the border, crisis on the border, death, and the police state. And it is the only system that is consistent with moral principles, economic principles, and religious principles. Another part of this federal killing machine are the invasions and occupations and wars of aggression against other countries, especially third world countries. We don't know exactly how many people they've killed in Afghanistan and Iraq over the past 20 years, but it's got a number at least in the hundreds of thousands. It's incredible. And keep in mind that these killings are illegal under our form of government because there has never been a congressional declaration of war, as the Constitution requires, before the president can use his army to wage war. And they're continuing the killing. I mean, even though they've been thrown out of Afghanistan, and they're still in Iraq, they're still killing people in Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and other parts of the world. And when people retaliate with terrorist strikes, then they go ballistic and they say, oh, Jacob, it's because they hate us for our freedom and values, not because of our federal killing machine. Well, this is nonsense. It's precisely because of their federal killing machine that they're able to initiate this whole war on terrorism racket, which then destroys our freedom here at home with such inane things like the Patriot Act and mass secret surveillance. And it's all a racket that enables the huge army of so-called defense contractors to continue feeding at the public trough, which they've done for decades. We can go all the way back to the Vietnam War. When they invaded Vietnam, they killed more than 1 million Vietnamese, and they sacrificed 58,000 of my generation soldiers for nothing. Those 58,000 men died for nothing. Oh, yes, I know they said the Reds are coming, Jacob, the Russians are coming. It was all just a racket. Just a racket that enabled this army of defense contractors, and I put defense in quotation marks, to continue feeding at the public trough. And the root of all this is the conversion of the federal government to what is called a national security state form of governmental structure. It's a totalitarian form of governmental structure. They wield omnipotent totalitarian powers. This is no part of our heritage. Our heritage is a limited government republic with just a basic, small, relatively small military force. We need to get rid of the CIA, the NSA, the Pentagon, the vast military industrial complex, bring all the troops home, dismantle the empire of military bases, and restore a limited government republic and a basic military force to our land. That's our heritage. And that's the only system that is consistent with a genuinely free and peaceful society. We've got sanctions and embargoes. That's part of the federal killing machine. Now, one of the fascinating things about sanctions and embargoes is that the mentality that goes into this part of the killing machine is the same mentality that goes into terrorism. Terrorists target innocent civilians as a way to get a political goal. That's what sanctions and embargoes do. They target the innocent population of a country in order to get a political end in that country, such as regime change. And they kill innocent people in the process. In the 1990s, Madeleine Albright, who was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, the official spokesperson for the United States to the world under a democratic regime, she was asked whether the deaths of 500,000 Iraqi children from the sanctions, children, were worth it. And she said, yeah, those deaths are worth it. And by it, she meant regime change in Iraq. That is the ouster of Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, and his replacement with another U.S.-approved dictator. That was their goal. That's why they were killing those children with the sanctions. And the irony is that Saddam Hussein, who they were now calling the new Adolf Hitler, had been a partner and ally of this killing machine in the previous decade under Republicans when he was waging his war of aggression against Iran. They were helping him kill Iranians because they hated Iran. We need to bring an end to this foreign policy tool of sanctions and embargoes. Look, they've had this embargo against Cuba since 1960. What's that all about? Oh, Jacob, the Reds are coming. It's ridiculous. The Cold War supposedly ended in 1989. And yet they still have this embargo that targets the Cuban people with death and suffering in the hopes that they'll rise up in a violent revolution, oust the communist regime, and replace it with another U.S.-approved dictatorship like the one that preceded Fidel Castro. It violates fundamental principles of morality and just conduct. We need to bring it to an end, this part of the federal killing machine. There are also the state-sponsored assassinations. Since the time the CIA got established. It was already planning on conducting state-sponsored assassinations on anyone that they consider is a threat to national security. And their power is omnipotent. The federal judiciary is not going to get involved. They're too scared to get involved trying to stop the CIA from assassinating people. Congress is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the military-industrial complex and the CIA. And no president since John Kennedy is going to dare take on these people. And let's face reality here. There is no reasonable doubt that they took out Kennedy. Despite all their little talk of conspiracy theories and so forth, the evidence is established. The circumstantial evidence has established beyond all reasonable doubt that they took out Kennedy the same way they took out the president of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba, the same way they targeted Jacobo Arbenz, the democratically elected president of Guatemala, with assassination, the same way they orchestrated the kidnapping and assassination of General Rene Schneider in Chile, the same way they ginned up that coup in Chile that left the democratically elected president of Chile dead, Salvador Allende, the same way they had repeated assassination attempts against the president of Cuba, Fidel Castro. They went after Kennedy because Kennedy had the courage. He was the only president who was determined to put a stop to this federal killing machine. And that's why they had to stop him. Because the probability is almost a certainty that had he lived, this federal killing machine would have come to a screeching halt. And that's why they needed to take him out, as a threat to so-called national security. Same reason they cited for all these other assassinations of political leaders. We need to confront this part of our dark heritage as a national security state. And we need to bring it to an end. There's also the war on drugs that both Democrats and Republicans have forced it upon our country. It's going on for decades. Look how many people it has killed with the turf battles and the gang wars and the corrupted drugs that come from the black market. They say, oh, people die of drug overdoses. A large number of those people, they're not overdoses at all. They're black market corrupted drugs that would never happen in a legitimate legalized market. Look what they've done to Mexico. They've destroyed Mexico. Mexico is one of the loveliest countries in the world. Americans love traveling down there, driving their cars, visiting all the historical sites, and not anymore. I mean, no American would be crazy to drive in the northern states, Sinaloa and so forth, where all these drug cartels are. And these drug cartels are a direct result of the war on drugs, the illegality, just like Al Capone was a direct result of prohibition of alcohol. As soon as they finished prohibition, all those alcohol cartels went out of business. And that's the only way to put these cartels out of business. There have been more than 100,000 people killed or disappeared in Mexico, not because of drugs, but because of the drug war. It needs to come to a stop. There's only one solution to this. And that solution isn't cracking down more and more on the drug cartels. All that does is produce more violence. The only way to terminate the drug cartels is through the legalization of drugs. That puts them out of business immediately. They cannot compete against legitimate pharmacies and other businesses selling drugs that are not corrupted. You see, drug addicts and people in drug abuse, this doesn't belong in the criminal justice system. This kind of problem belongs in drug rehab centers. And so the only solution is legalize not just marijuana, legalize fentanyl, methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, legalize it all. And let pharmacies and other businesses provide for the supply of these things, which immediately brings an end to all the death and destruction of liberties. And there's another point we need to keep in mind about this drug war. It's the most bigoted government program in the federal government since segregation, possibly even more bigoted than segregation was. Everybody knows that this program has fallen disproportionately on blacks. The bigoted cops and bigoted judges use it as an opportunity to exercise their bigotry in a very legal and legitimate manner and even get praised about it. They stop blacks and subject them to searches and seizures arbitrarily in the name of enforcing the war on drugs, humiliate them with ridiculous questions, or they engage in no-knock raids as an excuse to kill blacks, or asset forfeiture enables them to stop blacks traveling down the highway and just steal their money from them. Or look at the inordinately long jail sentences that are meted out to blacks by bigoted judges at both the federal and the state level. We need to bring an end to this bigotry and to all this death and suffering. And the way we do that is by ending the war on drugs. So this is why I'm running for president, to bring an end to the federal killing machine that Democrats and Republicans have foisted upon our land. But then there's the welfare state side of this thing. I mean, that's also contributing to the out-of-control spending, debt, and monetary debauchery that has characterized this system that Democrats and Republicans have brought into existence. And we're talking about welfare state programs like Social Security, Medicare, education grants, food stamps, public housing, corporate bailouts, every program that takes money from one group of people and gives it to another group of people. The perfect embodiment of the socialist concept, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. And why do they have this socialist program over here on the welfare state? Well, to keep people mollified, to keep people pacified, to keep people suppressed so that they don't object or protest against the killing machine. It's like a giant welfare opium den where everybody's here smoking on their welfare opium and really happy and content and can't be bothered by conscience when children are dying because of sanctions or people are dying because of invasions and occupations. Oh, leave me alone. I just want to keep sucking on my welfare pipe here. They've destroyed family values with this Social Security system. They say, oh, it's all based on care and compassion. Give me a break. The IRS isn't care and compassion. A Social Security bureaucrat is not care and compassion. Children helping parents on a voluntary basis in their hour of need, that's care and compassion. We lived it without Social Security for more than 100 years. And it instilled in the American people a sense of family values where families come together and a sense of caring for others on a purely voluntary basis. That's what we need to recapture in this country. We need to ditch this socialist program. And then Medicare, it destroyed the finest healthcare system in history. I mean, prices were low and stable before Medicare and Medicaid. This is what gave rise to the perpetual healthcare crisis, soaring prices. We need to get rid of it, ditch it entirely, and restore a totally free market healthcare system. It is the only way to get healthcare back on the right track. In other words, we need to recapture the faith that Americans once had in themselves and ourselves, and faith in others, a faith in families, a faith in church groups and neighborhood groups and charitable organizations. We need to recapture that faith and reject the faith that has been inculcated in the American people, a faith in the coercive apparatus of the government. For me, we got to restore a faith in God instead of a faith in Caesar. And then we need to do some serious self-examination in this country. We need to talk about where we started out as a country and how we've gotten to where we are. We need to look at our founding principles. We know there were some bad founding principles, slavery, women's rights, but there were some good founding principles, including sound money. And we need to go back to those sound founding principles of where people keep everything they earn and they decide what to do with it. And then charity bubbles up from within through the voluntary actions of people who are deciding what to do with the money that they're earning in their employment or elsewhere. Now then we're talking about a genuinely free society. We need to look at this, the good founding principle of a limited government republic. If we do this, if we engage in this self-examination and we start focusing on the restoration of the good, sound founding principles of our country, I have no doubts that America can lead the world to the highest reaches of freedom, peace, prosperity, and harmony with the people of the world that mankind has ever seen. I hope you'll give me your consideration and your support. My website is www.jacobforliberty.com. I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president in 2024.